Hello, sophomores. This is Mrs. Gradian, and I'm here today to talk to you about creating a one-pager for your thought log. So the first thing I'm going to do is share my screen so you can see the poem that I am basing my thought log on. And the poem is called Mending Wall by Robert Frost, and I'll read it to you right now. Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that sends the frozen groundswell under it and spills the upper boulders in the sun and makes gaps even two can pass abreast. The work of hunters is another thing. I have come after them and made repair where they have left not one stone on a stone, but they would have the rabbit out of hiding to please the yelping dogs. The gaps, I mean, no one has seen them made or heard them made, but at spring mending time, we find them there. I let my neighbor know beyond the hill, and on a day we meet to walk the line and set the wall between us once again. We keep the wall between us as we go, to each the boulders that have fallen to each. And some are loaves, and some so nearly balls we have to use a spell to make them balance. Stay where you are until our backs are turned. We wear our fingers rough with handling them. Oh, just another kind of outdoor game, one on a side. It comes to little more. There where it is, we do not need the wall. He is all pine and I am apple orchard. My apple trees will never get across and eat the cones under his pines, I tell him. He only says, good fences make good neighbors. Spring is the mischief in me, and I wonder if I could put a notion in his head. Why do they make good neighbors? Isn't it where there are cows? But here there are no cows. Before I built a wall, I'd ask to know what I was walling in or walling out, and to whom I was like to give offense. Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that wants it down. I could say elves to him, but it's not elves exactly, and I'd rather he said it for himself. I see him there, bringing a stone grasped firmly by the top in each hand, like an old stone savaged armed. He moves in darkness, as it seems to me, not of woods only, and the shade of trees. He will not go behind his father's saying, and he likes having the thought of it so well, he says it again. Good fences make good neighbors. So that's the poem. And now what I'm going to do is share my creation of a one pager with you. And this is the actual one pager. So a one pager uses illustrations as well as words from your text to show the meaning of the actual text that you're looking at. And what I decided to do, and I apologize that the image is upside down for you or backwards, but I drew the title of the poem, Mending Wall, in the center of the page. And then around the title, I drew as best I could the rocks that this wall is made of. And I felt like the narrator of the poem and the neighbor were on opposite sides of the literally opposite sides of the wall, but also figuratively or metaphorically on opposite sides. So what I did was I wrote narrator at the top of the page here, and then I also wrote neighbor on the other side. And then in pink, some of the terms that I decided to discuss of the different poetic devices are all in pink. So for the narrator, I wrote contrasts, and for the neighbor, I wrote contradictions. And then at the top of the title of the poem, I wrote metaphor. Let's see what would happen if I do this. Does that make any difference? It still looks backwards. Oh well. Anyway, and so I wrote different lines from the poem on either side that illustrated the perspective of the narrator and the perspective of the neighbor. So on the narrator side, his perspective is something there is that doesn't love a wall. And then later on, he says, we do not need a wall. And he talks about how I am apple orchard, the narrator is all pine. And then the narrator obviously believes that the walls are not necessary, but the neighbor loves this saying. In fact, he says it twice in the poem, good fences make good neighbors. As you can see, I also tried to use little pictures whenever I could of different important images. So we have the narrator who's the apple tree and the neighbor who's the pine tree. And then I also showed how the fence itself was broken apart every spring and they had to mend it. And then I tried to illustrate some other things too, like the use of certain poetic devices. So here, when he says, "My apple trees will never get across and eat the cones under his pines," this is personification. One of the themes in this poem, before I built a wall, I'd ask to know what I was walling in and walling out. So this challenging of society's norms and why do we need walls? What are we afraid of? Um, and I also pointed out the setting and context of the poem. In this line, he says, "At spring mending time, we meet to walk the line and set the wall between us once again." So that kind of gives us the idea of the context of the poem. He uses a bit of irony in this poem, and he uses repetition when he has the neighbor say, "Good fences make good neighbors," again. He uses a simile when he describes his neighbor um, bringing a stone grasped firmly by the top in each hand like an old stone savage armed. Um, and then there's a metaphor. He moves in darkness, as it seems to me, not of woods only, and the shade of trees. So metaphor, when we say someone is in the dark, it's often a metaphor for not understanding. So that's kind of what your one pager might look like. I, however, found that I needed another page to do a little bit further analysis. So I didn't really draw many pictures here, but what I did was I thought about walls in general and how they're really an ancient device that we've used throughout our lives. So walls are used in keeping livestock in, but they also keep predators out. And the narrator in this poem is challenging this ritual, and he even is impishly trying to get the neighbor, kind of goading him with this teasing thing, but the neighbor will not change his mind. Um, but the narrator really is participating in this ritual even while he challenges it because he meets his neighbor year after year to build the wall up. So basically, Frost is pointing out the ambiguity in human nature in this deceptively simple poem. And even in the style of his poem, instead of using elevated language and a lot of rhyme and rhythm, he uses blank verse and fairly simple language to describe a kind of complex idea. Then, one more thing I wanted to point out about this poem is the fact that even though it was written in the early 1900s, which seems like a long, long time ago to most of us, the theme of this poem, of the idea of walls dividing us from each other, is pretty relevant today. There are literal walls that we've been fighting over and figurative, metaphorical walls. Um, Things that divide us are education and science and gender and race and religion and the wealth, the haves versus the have not, healthcare and political parties. All of those things seem to divide us. And so I said, this is the connection that this poem has to our world today. So that's just an example of what you might do to create a one pager. I hope this has been helpful to you, and I hope that you enjoy working on this project. Thank you for listening. Have a good day.